on the East Coast, and get ready to be blessed and hear a great story, a story of stealing victory from the jaws of defeat. Our bumper is running. We're recording and streaming to multiple platforms. We will start a countdown to Studio 20 starting now. Well, good evening. Welcome. This is we're off to. Hold on, just ignore that. We'll pull the curtain. I thought I had done that. My mouse isn't working good. Maybe I've got a handful of batteries over here. Maybe I'll replace them after the program if I need to. Wow, get ready for to hear how God moves in such a powerful way. A story that none of us want to happen in our own lives. Special thanks to Ben Cooper for he's in our pjnet.tv chat room, and if you're not there right now while this is live, well, you're doing it wrong. Go to pjnet.tv. There's friends over there waiting to see you, and you can chat in our chat room and enjoy the sweetest fellowship on the internet. If you don't go there, well, we're just glad you're watching it wherever you're seeing this. Thank you. And you are about to be blessed in a powerful way. And to bring us, I forgot to do something here. Bob's hair was parted on the wrong side, so we moved it. Bob Arnold and his wife Jeannie, who may stay with us for the duration of the program, we don't know, join us. Did I say Ben Cooper? Thank you for making the contact and helping make the arrangements, and of course our associate producer Barbara Byers helping us with the schedule. And Bob and Jeannie, you have an amazing story. But Bob, before I start out on your 71-year journey, Bob's older than I am, and I resent that because you still have hair, and but you've been deeply involved serving others and encouraging others all your life, haven't you?
Yes, I've worked in Youth for Christ for 40 years. So,
is that all?
Then I started my most recent ministry 8 years ago called The Meadow, which is focused on spiritual formation.
Okay, but let's spend the majority of our time. You have a story that most people would not be able to tell. You have a story of every parent's worst nightmare, but you also have a story of how God helped you through it. So take us back. Tell us what happened.
Well, we were out with a couples the night, and we went back and went to bed, and I guess it was about 11:30 or 12 o'clock. I'd gotten up and gone to the bathroom, and Jeannie answered a phone call, and she's answering the phone call. She says, "I can't. Why are you telling me Marcy is dead? What are you trying? Is this some kind of a prank or something?"
2 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, 2 o'clock in the morning, and so she's like, "What? Why are you saying these things?" And then, so she hands the phone to me, and the voice on the other side says, "On the corner from Horry County, South Carolina, and I'm at your daughter's apartment, and we found her dead." Well, the world stopped at that point. And, what could we do? Could we pray for a miracle? Could we do anything? And there was nothing we could do. At that point, death held the hammer, and, we're just like stunned. And at that point, you really go into shock. And it was just beyond anything you could possibly think of. Here, our daughter's 7 hours away in Myrtle Beach. I say 12 o'clock. Jeannie says 2 o'clock in the morning. And, who can you call at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "Hey, look, my daughter's dead," And we're sort of stuck there. And just a few minutes later, our daughter comes out, our middle daughter. She was best friends with Marcy, and she wondered why we were screaming. And she came up and she said, "Oh, no, not Marcy, not Marcy." Marcy was her best friend. It was her idol, everything, and her world collapsed. Well, we were afraid to call anybody. We didn't want to, call them in the middle of the night. But she went downstairs and called her friend, and her friend, who her father and another guy were our best friends, and they came over, and we just sat in our living room, and they were wise enough not to try to give us any simple advice or simple comfort. We just sat there like Job did and on the mountain and just, what has happened? This is impossible. You know, how can you possibly, what do we do? But no one just said anything, which is the wisest thing that we could do. So that was just, just beyond comprehension. And interestingly, 7 o'clock in the morning, the first people to show up was the people from our old church. And then people started coming, 40 and 50 people. And Jeannie's sister-in-law was in the funeral business, and she said to us, well, this is going to cost between $10,000 and $15,000. But the funny thing, whenever somebody dies, I end up with no money in my, and so when my mother died, I didn't have enough money to go to the funeral, but somehow God worked it out that I was able to go to the funeral and come back to the funeral with a lot of money. But in this case, I had $78 in the bank. And, it's sort of a, pretty much normal for youth for Christ work.
Okay. you just gotten paid, huh? Okay.
So we, she says $10,000 or $15,000. I said, well, in my mind, there's nothing we can do. It's beyond our capability, And a couple of our board members were there, and one of our board members came up to us, and I always cry when I say this, but he said, "Look, you do whatever you want for this funeral. We'll pay for everything."
Amen. There you go. There you go.
But so it just, that was just one of the amazing things that happened day after day. The next night I was trying to go to sleep, and the reality of the matter is, I was in so much emotional pain. I literally did not think I would make it through the night. I thought I was going to die. It was so hard, So, I made it through the night, but man, it's one of the worst nights of my life, So.
Now, what year was this, Bob?
This was 2002. So it's actually 19 years ago. And the interesting thing is, from the day that she died, for the next 3 years, I wrote 1,500 pages in a journal. So I wrote a lot of those things in the journal just to help me deal with the thing that I was going through. And we would also, Jeannie and I both spent by ourselves in the morning a couple hours every morning just being quiet with the Lord and trying to sort through what just happened. It was beyond comprehension, And but the book that I wrote and just finished, and it was finished in August, was a lot of that book was from those first 3 years, but a lot of it was the wisdom that we gained over the past 18 years. And so, and then, the people of God, when there's a war, they know how to fight. They also know how to fight when there isn't a war too. But the reality of the matter is they know how to fight, and they came to our aid. There were always 40 or 50 people at our house, and they were saying, "Look, we have to be here. This is the place where God is in Baltimore right now." And they came in, they weeded our garden, they brought food, did everything that they possibly could for us. And it was so, all through everything we went through, the people, our friends, were just so present, doing everything they possibly could for us. It was, very, very beautiful. So
Jeannie,
go ahead.
Jeannie, can I ask you a question?
Maybe.
All right. Well, if not, pass it off. I can't imagine what you're going through, but clearly the wagons are circling. The friends are coming around and trying to help you out, but there's a point that those friends go away. They can't stay there with you forever. How do you, as a wife, how did the two of you as a married couple comfort and build and hold each other up when you can't hold yourself up?
I don't know. We just did. In that pain, we had the pain that was common to both of us, so we both knew what it was and how it felt.
Bob, in your involvement in ministry, you're doling out all the advice and the wisdom and the truth about how to deal with bad things. But when something this this terrible, this horrifying happens to you, was all that head knowledge helping you?
Well, I'd say that it did help me in one sense, is I had to keep going back to the foundation that God is good and that God is love. And, so I had to keep going back to that. But, you know, for a long time, I read one book a week, and I was reading theology books, real hardcore theology books for that longest point in time. Once Marcy died, I could never read another theology book. Now, I've read all kind of spiritual theology, but the actual theology book, I haven't been able to go back to that. My existence went from my head down into my heart as soon as this thing happened. And, one of the things that, like day 3, I'm sitting downstairs and I'm saying, I've got to know where Marcy is. I'm just beyond my comprehension that something like hell would exist. And, I didn't know what to do. And so I sat there praying and asking God, I've got to know where she is. And then I think it was Psalm 31, God says, it says, David, I guess says it, God is full of mercy and grace. And with that sense, it gave me tremendous assurance that, that Marcy was in heaven, and that set a whole different continuum on. Now, that didn't solve all the grief and all the sorrow of missing her for the last 20 years, but there was a real sense of peace about where Marcy is, and it laid a foundation for a lot of things later on. But, it was something that I had to really just work through, and I had to hear clearly from the Lord, even though, we know all the dynamics. She accepted Christ and all that, but at that point, there's a deeper thing to go through.
There's a point at which you turn a corner. Grief like this never really entirely goes away, but initially we're in denial and we're basically dysfunctional.
Yeah.
How long did that period last, and at what point was there a pivot point in your life that you could say, I've got to get back to what God has called me to do?
Yeah.
And how did you make that transition from in the depth of grief to, I don't want to say normal, but at least functional?
Yeah. Well, what happens when something like this happens, you go into shock because you really can't emotionally handle it. It's too much to handle. Now, this may seem unbelievable, but Marcy died in September, right? In January, I remember getting up in the morning praying, and I realized that Marcy had actually died. Now, that may seem incredible, but it took that long. Now, I continued functioning, all during the period. I continued working, and, Jesus for Christ gave me a lot of leverage to do what I needed to do, but I kept doing things, but, they lightened the load in terms of what I had to have. But it took me that long to really internalize and know that she had actually died, Now, one thing I want to tell you about the funeral, it was one of the most amazing nights of my life, but, we had a 3 to 5 funeral, right? And there were mobs of people there at 3 to 5, and, it was so nice. And then, we got to the funeral home a little late that night, about 5 minutes late. The funeral home was packed full. For 2 hours, once we entered the door, we didn't move for 2 hours straight. And, the people were telling us that the police were basically out there directing traffic, and they were calling their friends and basically telling them, there's no point in going to the funeral home because you're not going to get in. And again, there's a thing, there were people, I coached sports for years, people from the teams were there. Our kids went to 4 different private schools. They were all there. Our friends from our hometowns were there. Just people came from everything. One of my good friends in Youth for Christ that worked in Long Island came there for the whole weekend and just sat in the corner, being there as a friend. He didn't expect me to do anything for me. He was just there to be there. And it was so wonderful. There's a great verse in Ecclesiastes where it says it's better to be in the house of mourning than in the house of pleasure. And, when you go to a funeral home, it's so important that you're there. You don't have to say anything. The worst thing you can do is try to give people advice at that point, because there is no advice. How do you explain a 22-year-old girl dying? You can't do it. right? So, and then one of the things that I've really tried to do with the book, because this is where I knew I was, I tried to be brutally honest about what happened. So fortunately, I had those first 3 years of journal. And people say at the beginning of the book, they spend a lot of time crying, because but the thing is, I know that if a person loses a child, they really don't need these happy, happy stories about what's going on, or, hey, everything's great, you got 2 more kids. You can't you can't really give them advice, but nothing is more important than your presence. Your presence is so, so important.
That would be 3 more kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
Leaving it.
Yeah, the mother remembers it more more experientially, I think, when we.
Yeah. But it's so anyway, that's why, and that's one of the, as we've been getting feedback over the last couple of months, people are so appreciative that we were honest about what we felt, and they like the fact that we went into the depth of our feeling and explained it. And, one woman wrote me 2 weeks ago, and she said, I so much appreciate your honesty in this book. I lost my husband 4 years ago, and all the things you were expressing are the things that I felt all during that time. It was such a comfort to me. And then I got a note. I coached Little League when I was 18 years old, and, I was very successful at it. I won the championship 2 out of 3 years. But needless to say, anyway, one of the kids on my team had lived right down the street, and his brother was a very good friend of mine. When we were like 9 and 10 years old, we were out playing baseball and doing all kinds of sports. Well, at 10 years old, he died from leukemia. Mm-hmm. And so, when this kid came out and tried out for my team, I knew right away he looked exactly like his brother. I knew he was a shortstop. And, he's on my Facebook page and reads all the spiritual stuff I post. And he said to me, I consider you my mentor. But he said, I got the book and read it, and I can't tell you how thankful I am, because I've always heard the legend of my brother dying, but I never knew what was going on in my family all those years. It was such a great thing for me to be able to see what happened in your family and realize the same kind of things occurred in my family.
Bob, I'm going to read a quote, and I'm going to see if you know who the author of these words are. The problem with denying suffering is that it allows death to hold all the cards, and sorrow moves deeply into our soul. Who said that?
A guy by the name of Robert Conrad Arnold. I recognize that name.
But we call him Bob, right?
Yeah, that's, and that's why, one of the reasons why I wanted to be so honest in this book is because I wanted to give people an example of what honesty, was all about. And see, the thing is, sorrow has this really scary allure to it. And you're afraid to think about the person that dies. You're afraid to get too close to it. But the thing is, what happens is, just like, in any darkness, darkness holds the cards. And when you bring light into it, it begins to clear up. And so, I really practiced as much as possible of becoming honest about what I was really feeling and what I was really thinking. And one of the things that I did, which was really pretty painful thing to do, I would go back and relive experiences with Marcy. I went to her high school. Jeannie and I went to her apartment down in Myrtle Beach, where she ended up dying. And see, the thing is, if you embrace sorrow, it will become your friend. If you basically turn sorrow away, it basically becomes your enemy. And that quote is where that quote comes from, is that sorrow becomes like an entanglement, and it becomes a power that, really takes over your life. But when you embrace sorrow as a friend, believe it or not, it becomes, you embrace sorrow, it becomes a friend, and you find out that it's a great helper. So you have this sorrow, and it's there, you can't get rid of it. But for some reason, when you embrace that sorrow, and it's very much like the prodigal son, the father, when the son came back, could have said, I told you so, but he went over and embraced him and grabbed him, and then he gave him a ring, and he gave him shoes, and threw him a party. And so by embracing his son, that was the turning point in the prodigal son's life right there. So, it's a very, very big thing of like learning to embrace sorrow, and that sorrow, when you embrace it, will become your friend.
Another notion that has come through, that has made itself apparent in you living through this and writing a book about it, is that most of us, when we encounter problems, we want to run from them or run through them, run around them, but move. The last thing we would want to do is just sit still, but your experience counsels otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's a very clear scriptural point throughout the whole Bible, is that running away from a problem really doesn't solve the problem. It makes the problem actually bigger. And so if you look at Joseph, just the wonderful story of Joseph is that wherever he was, he found favor with the leadership, and he found favor with God, And I think he found favor because he went in there, put his head down, and said, I'm going to be the best person I can in these circumstances. Now, one of the things I've found that happens when you enter into like any kind of deep sorrow kind of situation, that, John Eldridge says that when Satan sees this thing happen, he becomes like a bunch of sharks. He sees blood and he goes and attacks. And a lot of times when this kind of thing happens, problems begin to multiply. For us, Jeannie's uncle had a heart attack. My good friend basically had to have an operation on his spinal cord. Our very, very good friend's daughter ended up with AIDS. One of my people that were on staff had high blood pressure that they couldn't function. Another one had a paranoia. One of my best friends lost $500,000 in his business. And 1 year, almost to the day that Marcy had died, the things that are just mounted in September was like one thing after every single day. And I'm saying to myself, what the heck is going on here, And I'm going to read you just a little quote from the Bible, and things were just so completely out of control. I'm worn out. I'm at the end of all my ropes, crushed near the point of being knocked out. There's nothing left to fight with. I can't talk anymore. I don't know how to pray. I don't know what to pray, but help. The life I am living is so intense, so overwhelming. I don't know if I can go on any longer. I need God's hand to come and restore me emotionally, to give me more vision and new weapons of warfare. Deliver me in your strength, your vision, and your might, Father. Father, is there any rest? Is there any peace? So I pick up my coffee cup, and I look on my coffee cup, and the coffee cup says, stop whining and start paddling. Sometimes God's not very empathetic. And then I pick up my Bible to find a little encouragement from my Bible, and it says, take up your mat and walk, But I really needed to find out at that point what God was up to. So I happened to know a guy who had lost a son and wrote a book on devotions called Devotions for a Desperate Man. And he just happened to be coming to town, right? And so I said to this friend of ours, you think you can set up a meeting where I could meet with him? So I ended up meeting with him. I tell him the story I just told everybody. And he looks at me and he says, now, I don't really know for sure what's going on. But this is a guy who's been reading the Bible for 60 or 70 years, very, very astute, spiritual man. He said, but I've seen what has happened to you occur a number of times in my lifetime. And he says, I can't say this for sure, but this is what I think. I think God trusts you. And that was one of the most humbling, most amazing things that anybody had ever said to me in my life. And I said to him, well, what should I do? And he said, just trust God and stay where you are and be faithful. It's one of the greatest pieces of life. But see, Satan thinks we're going to bail out when things get tough. It's like, who's going to love God when nothing good is happening to him? It's like Job, I know my Redeemer lives. And so when you can be in the middle of very tough things and you just stay there, you don't have this big smile on your face, but you're faithful and trusting. That's what it's all about. And that's where the big defeat comes. And I think in our situation, as people read the book, they're so encouraged by saying, we've seen you walk through very, very difficult times, and we saw you, and we say it's a beautiful, wonderful thing to see how God has responded to you and taken care of you.
Let me ask you about the book, Bob. When the Circle is Broken, our journey through deep sorrow and surprising joy in the loss of our daughter, sounds like a book that's going to chronicle the events leading up to that fateful night in 2002 in September, and then your journey of recovery after that. Is that it? Is there more? Is there other people's stories in there?
Well, we have about 7 other people that write stories that are our friends that we've, also who have encountered very, very deeply, deep grief in their life, whether the loss of their husband or, it's like what loss of a child, and health problems. And, one couple had, a child when they were born with cancer. And so they have chapters where they tell their story. And in the midst of that, it's also, they see God's hand in the midst of very troubling times. And see, the thing is, Jeannie and I would both say this, and, is we would never, never, never want to lose our daughter. But in reality, in the same breath, we would say we would never want to miss the God that we have encountered over the last 18 years.
Mm.
And so, God come to us when we needed it, exactly the exact moment when we needed it. Every time and time again. He's been faithful over and over again,
If you make that choice, you can run from God or run toward God, but usually that is a choice that is made in crisis. And I've often quoted myself as saying, heroes are born of crisis, but so are cowards.
Yeah.
Well, you find out what you're made of. Now, let me ask you this, Bob. Let's suppose that someone out there is grieving right now. They've had a tremendous loss. Yeah. And they see this book pictured behind me, and they say, yes, I'm going to go get that book because in that book is the answer that's going to end my grief. I just need to read this book and find out the secret.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Well, I don't think there's a secret. I think it's going to there is lessons and principles that we've learned over the last 18 years will help them, where you begin practicing those things that will help them deal with it. But it's, this is the kind of thing, there's no lesson. You've been a coach. This is like playing in a game where you're 50 points behind and, it's only the first quarter, and, it's, and so you've got to learn some things that, will help you to cope with this and help you to be able to bring God's love to it. And the first thing you have to learn is this: God is on your side. See, our sorrow was God's sorrow first. See, we think we are the parents of our children, but we've got to remember we're the caretakers of our children. And our sorrow was God's sorrow first. And, a lot of people get in this circumstance and, they start thinking that God hates them and is against them. That's the opposite is true. Death is our enemy. Death is God's enemy, and Christ conquered death on the cross. But death is God's enemy, and and in the midst of this, sorrow is to know that God is, he had tears with his friend, right? So that it is that's one of the a very, very important piece that you have to deal with. And I think this honesty thing, it helped me so much to sit and write down in those journals what I really felt, and it was, just very, very good. And it was a great release. And it was a great release to begin having the courage to go to places where Marcy's memory was very, very present, and to do things that, that make me really feel close to her, So we were, I wrote a story. I don't know if I can get it right, but imagining that Marcy was, basically they were communicating with me, and basically I said, "Oh, Marcy, I want so much to be with you. I wish that Jeannie and all of our children could come and be with you in heaven." She says, "Oh no, you've got to stay there. God has a lot of things that he wants to do through your life in the next years.
Amen.
And
Amen.
then, I walked through another thing with her, and I realized, Marcy now knows more about God than I do, He said, well, sure. Yeah. She also knows more about me than I know about me,
Oh, man.
And,
Well,
but the thing is, then I realized, and this is very important for a parent that loses a child. Marcy has forgiven me for everything that I did wrong in her life, and it's no longer a part of her reality. What she wants, she doesn't want any payment for what we did wrong to her. She wants the very, very best for us in her life. And so, we can go on and live with the sense that, Marcy's one of our cheerleaders on the sideline, hoping that, seeing all the things that God can do through her life.
well, Bob, I'm glad we had a little extra time, and I'm glad Jeannie was able to join us. Jeannie, you're a strong woman to stick it out through all of this, and Bob, you mentioned it twice. When sometimes we find ourselves in losing situations,
Right.
and one of the keynote speeches that I have, in case anybody wants to hire me, is and I learned this in two ways. One, an experience where we did lose 52-0 on our home field. That's when I learned that you can be at your best when things are at their worst.
Yeah.
I won that game at a personal level. I set records that stood for decades in that game. But I also learned in disaster relief. I served 14 years.
Yeah.
Folks, it doesn't. Let's hope and pray that no one loses, buries their own child. That's the worst sorrow. But maybe it's not that. Maybe it's a financial loss. Maybe it's your own health. Maybe it's a relationship that is dying. Maybe it's a professional relationship. That whatever it is, life out there is going to test us. And Zig Ziglar said, a man, like a tree, is easier to measure when down.
True.
And I've often observed, championship winning characteristics, among teams, and I've noticed this: the championship teams, it's a lot easier to behave like a champion when you're winning.
Right. Yep.
You want to measure the mettle of a man. How does he react when he's losing?
Yep.
It tests us to our very core. And we either rise up, and as you said, I was thinking, when the horse tosses you off, get back on that horse.
Yeah.
Don't give the enemy, that enemy, whatever the enemy is, whether it's death of a child or any other bad circumstance, don't give it victory. Go on offense, get back on that horse, and overcome it. And knowing that you cannot, I cannot, none of us cannot defeat evil. It's stronger. It's a principality. It's not flesh and blood.
Yeah.
But we have already been given the victory. All we got to do is claim it. It's right there. Bob, Jeannie, I am thankful that you've been able to share with us. And we just encourage you to keep encouraging others. And I am grateful that the enemy lost this round. And you're a champion, both of you. And we appreciate you sharing your stories tonight.
Let me read one more quick quote.
All right, preacher, go ahead.
And it isn't, this isn't to insult us, but it tells you exactly what you're saying. And I think that's the comfort that people get in that book, that you can be down, but God's right there with you. And you can, like we said, the great things we've experienced God over the last 18 years. But this lady's been a friend of ours for 40 years, and she read the book, and she said, the story of your grief as you struggled with the loss of your dear Marcy, and your willingness to go deeper with God instead of further away. For this further away in the vulnerable, sincere, authentic, and inspirational, and therefore life-changing for those of us who were privileged to read it. So she's saying us walking through these very difficult days was a great inspiration to her. And I think for all of us, we all go through difficult times, but know that God will take those difficult times and turn into a deeper, more wonderful things. And sometimes it's better for your soul to lose than it is for you to win. Almost all times. I don't like that.
There you go. All right, Coach. Appreciate you, Bob, Jeannie. We love you very much. Thank you for sharing your story tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, glad to do it. Hey, folks, don't leave. I got something I want to share with you about tomorrow night. Stephanie Pavlentos is our scheduled guest each month, and she has made special arrangements to bring a surprise along with her. Let me remind you that on her last appearance, she poured her heart out about living through being the mother of a special needs child. And somebody saw that. And they got talking, and it seems like it has inspired a book to come out. And that's all I can say for now. You'll have to find out the rest tomorrow night. Make your plans to be here with us. Thank you for all of you who have joined us in the pjnet.tv chat room. Thank you again, Ben Cooper, for connecting us with Bob and Jeannie. Thank you, Barbara, our associate producer, for making all the arrangements so that we could all be a part, not just here, but be a part of each other's lives. It's the best kept secret on the internet, folks. Go to pjnet.tv. Before I leave, I have two questions that I always ask that have helped me a lot, and I hope that they will help you. They're very challenging. Be honest with yourself. Here's the first question. What is the boldest thing that you have ever done for Jesus Christ? And the second one, how long ago was that when you did that? I just hope that none of us would be satisfied with either answer.